Now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm joining you today to talk about our government's economic action plan, the so-called stimulus plan, and more specifically on the first quarterly report on the plan, which we are releasing to Canadians a little later today. Now, obviously, we are doing this in the context of a deep and unique global economic recession. Unlike the recessions of recent decades, for example, this one is occurring without a rise in inflation and interest rates. In fact, interest rates are at record lows, and many countries face the risk of deflation. As well, for the first time in history, all regions of the world are seeing a rapid slowdown of economic growth at the same time, or a so-called synchronized global recession. The immediate source of this global recession is the ongoing crisis of the financial sector in the United States and some other advanced Western countries. Our stimulus plan will help us to sustain economic activity and make transitions, but it cannot fix the problem of the global financial system. This, however, I can tell you, Canada was the last advanced country to fall into this recession. We will make sure its effects here are the least severe, and we will come out of this faster than anyone and stronger than ever. So far, in fact, while the global recession has hit Canada hard, it's important to remember it has not hit us nearly as hard as it has other countries. As the slide overhead shows, the American economy has been hit twice as hard as Canada. The same is true for the Europeans. The Japanese economy has so far been hit 4 times as hard as our country. Now, ladies and gentlemen, in times like these, I am reminded of a quotation, this one by investor Warren Buffett. He once said, "It is only when the tide goes out that you know who was swimming naked." The global economic crisis has revealed quite a few skinny dippers, but Canada is not one of them. Our comparative strengths include, first, according to the World Economic Forum, we have the strongest banking system in the world, no small asset in a period of world financial crisis. Second, I tell you, only a financial crisis can get Canadians to applaud the banks. The second, we have the best fiscal position in the G7. I speak not only of the lowest debt-GDP ratio and a long-term structural balance in the budgets of most governments, but also strengths in off-balance sheets items such as a solvent public pension plan. Third, the Bank of Canada has a stellar record of low and stable inflation. Canada should avoid both significant deflation and renewed inflation, both of which are significant risks in other countries. Fourth, we have a highly educated, skilled, largely mobile, modern workforce. And finally, we have real economic diversity, including commodities that will be in high demand as the global economy recovers. You should also know that Canada, as Bob mentioned, you should also know that Canada is receiving recognition these days in the United States and around the world for these strengths. And I say to you, as business people, as community builders, as citizens, if there ever was a time to put away that legendary Canadian modesty, it is now. Notwithstanding all the troubles around us, Canada has real advantages, real assets, and we should not hesitate to remind investors, partners, and leaders around the world of the comparative strengths of our great country. I also want to remind you of this, that while our government has had to make significant changes in our economic plans to address the immediate challenges of the global recession, we have not changed our focus on longer-term economic objectives. Now, in terms of strengthening markets, we continue, most importantly, and I should say unlike some developments in the United States, we continue to lower our tax burdens in Canada. For example, just this January 1st, business rates came down significantly once again, soon to be the lowest in the G7, and we created the tax-free savings accounts for individuals. I should just mention, I could go on about tax reduction. Let me just mention one statistic. Because of tax reductions introduced by Minister Flaherty in 4 successive budgets, the federal tax take in this country is falling to its lowest level in 50 years, the lowest since Prime Minister Diefenbaker was in office. We are opening markets to trade. When we took office, Canada, one of the most trade-oriented countries in the world, had free trade agreements with only 5 other countries. We have now concluded deals with 7 more, and we are finally making progress on internal trade with our provinces. We are also committed to principles-based, prudent regulation of our financial sector, including establishing national securities regulation. In the best Canadian tradition, we are committed to avoiding extremes in this area. We have avoided the extreme of the unregulated or barely regulated financial and mortgage industries that have caused such grief around the world. Nor will this country drift into a micromanaged, nationalized banking sector, which will cause its own problems down the road. We're also pursuing initiatives to improve the structural competitiveness of the Canadian economy, as in implementing, for example, the Wilson Report recommendations and the paper burden reduction initiative. In terms of public investments, we've launched the Building Canada plan. Through this plan, we are making the largest infrastructure investments in highways, roads, bridges, sewers, public transit, ports, harbors, rinks, community facilities. We're making the largest such investments at the national level in over half a century. Even before Budget 2009, we had already committed $33 billion of additional national infrastructure spending over 7 years. We're also making investments in higher education, especially in the research end of education, but we've also made targeted investments in 2 critical areas of human capital: immigration and the trade shortage. Despite the rising unemployment we are seeing today, the demographic reality is this: as soon as the global recession ends, Canada will face a long-run challenge of labor shortage, and we are getting ahead of it. Closely linked to our education and research funding is our science and technology strategy. The focus of this is on the area where we have been weakest in Canada, and that is on the successful commercialization of R&D. Of course, we're also making some sectoral investments when necessary. We try, where possible, to tie our aid to workers, to communities, or to targeted tax incentives. But as in sectors such as automobiles and forestry, we have broadened our tools where it's appropriate. The final major pillar is fiscal discipline. Now, I'm going to have a little bit more to say about this later. Obviously, the context changes in an era when G20 countries have agreed to move to deficit spending in order to stimulate their economies. But even as we are increasing expenditures temporarily for stimulus purposes, we are continuing to implement an expenditure management system which is permanently removing spending in low-performing programs. And this brings me to what I want to talk about today specifically, and that is our recent stimulus budget, or as we have called it, Canada's Economic Action Plan. Obviously, this is our effort to stimulate and sustain economic activity during a time of global economic crisis. But it is more. It is an opportunity to build on our natural strengths and comparative advantages. It is an opportunity to overhaul our national economic infrastructure. It is an opportunity to invest in skills training and new technologies. Ultimately, it is an opportunity to position ourselves so that when the recovery comes, we are among the first to catch the wave. We are in a time of crisis. It is not a crisis Canada created, not a crisis Canada alone can solve, but it is a crisis Canada can face and even take advantage of. In times of crisis, this country, Canada, has always risen to the occasion. We have a country that has been truly blessed and Canadians are a strong, compassionate, and adaptive people. We have faced down hardships before, and we will again. Neither recession, nor war, nor natural disaster have ever seriously impaired the destiny of this great land. We are positioned to emerge from this global recession in a stronger position in the world than we have ever been, and I am confident that we will. Merci beaucoup. Thank you again for your invitation.